Mark Twain once wrote that politicians and diapers should be changed often and for the same reason. When our founding fathers created our branches of government, they envisioned a group that would be representative of the population that they wished to govern. The average net worth in the House of Representatives is $511,000. More than half of the senators in that body have an average net worth of over $1 million. In Congress, the average net worth is approximately $1 million. The average net worth in an American household is $192,000. Term limits are one issue in an increasingly contentious American political landscape that has overwhelming bipartisan support, with 87% of Americans supporting term limits across party lines. With this overwhelming level of support, the logical question is, why do we not have term limits? The importance of this discussion cannot be overstated. If we don't take action now to set a limit on the power of increasingly entrenched politicians, we may lose the ability to do so in the future. As the disparity in wealth and age increases between representatives and represented, we see a corresponding rise in legislation drafted and passed that is less and less in the interest of the average American. The first step to solving any problem is to acknowledge that one exists. With increasingly polarized party lines, many Americans have fallen into the trap of voting along those party lines. With the DNC and GOP typically endorsing incumbents in primary elections, the result is an increasingly stagnant pool of representation that is more and more disparate from the best interests of the American people. This is an issue that affects every American, and one does not require a doctorate in political science to understand it, which is fortunate because I don't have one. Which is why I will rely on a quote from Dr. John David Roush Jr., who said the following while testifying before the United States Senate Judiciary Committee. Term limits can help restore public confidence in government by ensuring a regular influx of new ideas and perspectives, and by reducing the entrenched power of career politicians. I would like to take this opportunity to educate you on the history of the term limit discussion, discuss the pros and cons of term limits, and persuade you of the importance of advocating for term limits at the congressional and House levels. Once I have given you an overview of the points surrounding the term limit debate, I will also give you a moral reasoning from my perspective on why term limits are so important. To begin, let's look at the history of the term limit debate in the United States. If term limits are such a great idea, why didn't the Founding Fathers put them into the Constitution? The Founding Fathers actually had heated debates on term limits during the Constitutional Convention of 1787, with Federalists opposing the idea, believing that voters would oust incumbents when they needed to step down, and that many representatives would voluntarily step down. Unfortunately, they were unable to reach a consensus, and the topic was tabled in order to move forward with ratification. This did not mean that they all agreed on this issue. In fact, Thomas Jefferson, in a letter to Edward Rutledge, wrote, "I apprehend too that the total abandonment of the principle of rotation in the offices of President and Senate will end in abuse." This is not to say that term limits for state representation have no historical basis in the United States. In fact, prior to the ratification of the Constitution, Pennsylvania and Connecticut both had term limits for the positions of governor and state senator. Even the Articles of Confederation, America's first constitution, had imposed term limits for state representation. In 1955, the office of the presidency was restricted to 2 4-year terms with the passing of the 22nd Amendment to the Constitution. Unfortunately, in a 5-4 decision, the United States Supreme Court found the idea of congressional term limits unconstitutional. The Supreme Court reasoned that the term limits would constitute an additional qualification for members of Congress not listed in Article 1 of the Constitution. Having established the historical foundation of the term limit debate and the current standing of the United States Supreme Court's interpretation of the argument, I would like to look at the reason I believe this decision is faulty and the current path forward. In the U.S. Supreme Court, U.S. Term Limits, Inc. v. Thornton, Chief Justice Antonin Scalia's majority opinion examines the Constitution through a very narrow lens. The decision citing additional qualification does not rise to the level of other Supreme Court rulings that predate it. One example would be the Staples v. United States decision 1 year prior that held the possession of a fully automatic weapon was not a constitutionally protected right. Using Chief Justice Scalia's own logic, the Second Amendment of the Constitution contains no additional language qualifying the types of arms Americans can bear. While a decision at the highest court in the land may be seen as the final word on the matter, it is anything but. In fact, the current Chief Justice, John G. Roberts Jr., has presided over 8 reversals in the last 6 years. The first step in overturning the decision is to draft a bill on term limits. In order to start that process, term limits need to become the #1 issue of every constituent in every demographic. More on that later. Okay, so we now know that term limits are not unconstitutional, despite Justice Scalia's opinion. We know that the decision surrounding their constitutionality can be reversed. The next question is, should it be? An argument that has been held since the beginning of the term limit debate in the United States is that regular rotation of elected officials' eligibility will result in a lack of experienced representatives in government. This argument relies on a false equivalence, treating experience and efficacy as synonymous. In a world in constant flux due to significant shifts in technology year to year, having seasoned senators with 40 years of experience may not be the solution to current problems. Another common talking point for detractors of the term limit debate is that the voting public should be responsible for removing representatives who are failing to adequately represent their constituents. The issue with this line of reasoning is twofold. First, the modern election cycle has become increasingly cost prohibitive since the U.S. Supreme Court's Citizens United v. FEC ruling, which allowed corporations to make political donations as an expression of free speech. This has made incumbents with established relationships with corporations more likely to receive those funds, creating an unfair playing field. Secondly, the DNC and GOP know that voters are more likely to vote for an incumbent due to name recognition and voter apathy. This apathy is fed by a disillusioned public that believes that their vote doesn't matter, creating a feedback loop, according to a study published in Political Research Quarterly. Even if we completely ignored those points and believed that our elections were being held on an even playing field, the final question surrounding this topic would have to be, if Americans are unhappy with their representatives, then why don't they just vote for new ones? The answer is complicated. Between the concerns of party line voting and the increased dollar amount associated with congressional and senatorial races, Americans feel trapped voting along their party lines. One thing is not in question is that Americans are unhappy with their representation. The average among different polling data puts congressional approval ratings between 15 and 20%. The average over the last 10 years has never gone above 36%. With the understanding that the American people overwhelmingly support term limits, the fact that term limits are constitutional, and that the arguments against them are inherently flawed, the question is, what do we do about it? The first step is to get active in your community. You can do this by first attaining signatures from people in your congressional district who are registered to vote. This will help solidify your position. Contact your local news station to bring attention to what you are doing. Create a draft of the proposed bill with no other topics proposed. This will prevent the term limits issue from being considered alongside a separate topic that may not have the same level of support. Once you have reached a desired number of signatures, reach out to your congressman at a time and date that you have already established with the news. Explain that if your congressman is unwilling to make a clear statement pledging to take this bill to Congress and lobby in support of it, then many of his constituents, along with the media, will want to know why. Reach out to constituents of other congressional districts and ask them to repeat the same steps. Create a viral movement around this issue by asking every person who signs on to your petition to follow the movement on social media. In conclusion, We have covered the history of the term limit debate in the United States, where it stands today, and why it is such a necessary conversation to have at this juncture in American politics. We have also covered what can be done at the local level to revitalize this discussion in Washington, D.C. It will only be through these concerted actions now, as a people, that we will be able to ensure a system of government that matches the promise made by our founding fathers. I will leave you with these parting words from our nation's first president. However political parties may now and then answer popular ends, they are likely in the course of time and things to become potent engines by which cunning, ambitious, and unprincipled men will be enabled to subvert the power of the people and to usurp for themselves the reins of government, destroying afterwards the very engines which have lifted them to unjust dominion. Thank you.